Good morning, everybody, and welcome back. My name is Lisa Jarrett, and I am the co-founder and co-director of KSMoCA, the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr School Museum of Contemporary Art. I'm joined today by my co-founder and co-director, Harrell Fletcher, professor at Portland State University, and Amanda Lee Evans, who's one of our primary collaborators on the project. Also with us this morning are Mo and the artist Lucia Monge, who is one of our 2021 remote artist in residence and lecture series participants. I'm really happy to be able to have Mo here this morning to introduce Lucia. But before we turn it over to Mo, I just wanted to make sure to thank the folks at Dr. MLK Jr School that work with us to make this possible, including Jill Sage, the principal, Nancy Rios, Michelle Peak, and Paige Thomas, who work so hard to help us connect with the students and find questions and really good inroads for our artists to work with our community. So warm welcome to our Dr. MLK Jr School students who are going to be on the YouTube live channel. And we also have a group of Portland State University undergraduate students here with us today as well to meet Lucia and to ask a few questions at the end. So everybody, this is Mo, and Mo, we'd love to hear you introduce Lucia.
Hi everyone, I'm Mo, and I'm introducing artist Lucia Monge. I'm a student at Dr. Martin Luther King Jr School, and I'm also part of KSMoCA as the head photographer. Lucia Monge is a Peruvian artist whose work focuses on relationships between species. Now she lives in Portland with her family. Some of her recent projects include sending potato seeds into space and Plantone Mouvelle, a yearly walking forest performance to create better public green areas. And I'm passing it over to Lucia Monge.
Thank you, Mo. Thank you, everyone, for this invitation to talk, and for everyone at Dr. MLK Jr School for inviting me and being here. I'm going to, last term I presented a little bit of my practice overall, and today I wanted to focus on a specific project that you mentioned a little bit about, Mo. Thank you for the introduction. That is called Unearthing Futures. So I'm going to share my screen to so you can see some images of it. Okay, so organize my screen. So Unearthing Futures is a collaborative project that I started with, and I work with my friend and also an artist and an engineer called Xin Liu. And the project is about learning from potatoes and with potatoes, and about potatoes inspiring us to think about the future and the space travel in a variety of ways. So this is one of the first drawings that we made when we were talking about the project and imagining what the project could be like. And it includes different things that we imagined, like a dining room table that was covered with potatoes, rotating sculpture where potatoes could be grown without gravity. And we were focusing on potatoes. It might not be an obvious meeting, potatoes and space, but potatoes there are over 4,000 varieties of potatoes. So it's one species, but it's very diverse of a species. And the project starts when we're thinking there's a rise in biological and social monocultures. And that is being pushed both in agriculture and in contemporary politics. So we're thinking, instead of a future that is imagined as a high-performing, perfected single entity, whether it's a potato or a specific kind of person, why don't we think of the future as a diversity, with diversity, and seeing diversity as a capability to adapt and to resist change and new situations. So we think that potatoes can help us decolonize the narrative of planetary futures and through the act of growing, shaping, and sharing potatoes, we can have conversations about how we imagine the future in different ways. And these ways can incorporate different cultural aesthetics, different cultural relationships to time and to space. Where is the past? Where is the future? And then also bring a component of how can potatoes teach us and inspire new ways of thinking of new non-human relationships to the land and to other living beings. So I want to introduce the main character in this project, the potatoes, las papas. I should also mention that potatoes are a Peruvian crop, and I am a Peruvian person. So there's also a personal significance for me to include a Peruvian crop that is now widely grown all over the world. So I'll introduce las papas. So the light blue arrow is around Oregon, where we are now, and the red arrow is showing where Peru is on Earth. And potatoes are originally from Peru. And here I'm showing you a picture of a ceremonial vessel from the Monge culture, which is a pre-Hispanic coastal culture from Peru. And these are very, very old ceramics. And I'm showing them to you because they are representing the relationship between people and potatoes. And I love them because they're not only ceramics of potatoes, but they're ceramics of potatoes and people mixed together. That speaks not only of a close relationship in terms of food, but then also relationship in terms of other meanings around what potatoes can signify for people, and how this relationship is very, very old. So in Peru, there are around 4,500 varieties of potatoes. And these are the potatoes that we know about. There might be more. There are wild potatoes in Peru and in South America, in other places in South America that are grown in the wild that we don't even know, that haven't been discovered yet. So I think the US actually cultivates around 8 varieties of potato, just to give you kind of a contrast of the amount of potatoes that we might have seen here and the amount of potatoes that actually exist. So this is an example of just some of the potatoes, but if you see them, many of them you might not initially recognize them as potatoes because they come in all kinds of shapes and colors and patterns. And this is why the potatoes begin to or invite us to imagine diversity. Some of them are colorful not only in the outside, but also maybe in the inside. And this is how potatoes grow. So I'm going to share a little bit about potatoes as a living being, just in case if I bring up a potato, the first thing that comes to mind is a French fry. So potatoes are much more than French fries. And I would like to introduce to you the potato as a living being. This is a field of potatoes. This is how the potato plant looks. And you can see how many potatoes are here. And in this case, these potato plants have white flowers, but sometimes they can also have purple flowers. This is a main basic anatomy of a potato plant. You see there's the flowers, the stem, the leaves, and then underneath the ground, underneath that beautiful field, the potatoes grow. The potatoes are also called tubers. That's their name as part of like the body part of the plant. So this is important because usually when we grow a new potato plant, we can do so by putting a tuber or a potato inside the ground, and then from the potato will sprout, and from the potato the plant will grow. However, for this project, the tubers were too big, and I'll share with you what the first part of this project was in a little bit. You'll understand you'll understand why they are too big. So in the potatoes, in the potato plant, there's also potato fruit. Usually when we eat a part of a crop, it's a fruit. But in the case of potatoes, we're eating the tubers that are underground, and the fruit that are these round, they're kind of like cherry tomatoes, but green. They're very small. They would grow close to the flowers. And this is what they look like. They're very small. And if you cut them in half, they're very small seeds inside them. These are pictures of dried, dehydrated potato berries or potato fruit. And inside these, there are the potato seeds. Now, I put the ruler underneath is a ruler with centimeters, which I know that here in the US, you don't use centimeters. So to have a comparison, I put a Cheerio in the actual size. So you can see how small these potato seeds are. They're kind of like quinoa grains, but that Cheerio size is more or less the same. It's in relationship to what the potato seeds are. So they are very, very small. And because people can grow potatoes from the seeds, from the tubers, these potato seeds are actually called true potato seeds because these are the actual seeds. In Spanish, they're called las semillas botánicas. So in this project, we had to choose potato seeds, and we had to choose the potato seeds carefully. So we worked in collaboration with the International Potato Center, which exists. People ask me, is that true? Does it exist? And it does. The International Potato Center is based in Peru, and it was founded in 1971, but it works around the world with farmers and people who grow potatoes, and they crossbreed potatoes so that they can become resistant to different weather conditions and also to different plagues or pests when insects want to eat all of the potatoes. So these are some pictures of the International Potato Center that I visited in Lima, Peru, and they helped us with our project. And when I went there, they showed me how they grow potatoes. The last picture was growing potatoes in the field. Here they're growing potatoes in a lab, and they're keeping these potatoes. And they have the biggest collection of potatoes in probably the world. And they also taught me how they are growing these potatoes and the experiments that they're doing to test how the potatoes, what are the chances of these potatoes to live, what they call the viability tests. Here you can see how small the potatoes are. We had to use a piece of paper to be able to see all the little seeds and then put them on the ground. And when they landed on the ground, it was hard to distinguish them from the actual mix of the soil that has all different kinds of particles like perlite and other things that will help the potatoes grow. Now, the International Potato Center was going to give us the potato seeds for our project. However, we had a little bit of a time constraint. And I realized I haven't told you exactly what the first part of this project was. So I will tell you right now. We were looking for seeds that were small and that were Peruvian because we wanted to send potatoes to space. And we had a deadline. We had a specific day where these seeds had to be at NASA so that they could fly off to the International Space Station. But when we were talking to the International Potato Center, they could send us the seeds, but then the seeds had to arrive to the US and spend some time in quarantine, something that we are very familiar nowadays, right? This word that is such a big part of our lives now. The potatoes also had to be in quarantine because they're biological material. So when they arrive to a new country, they have to be contained in a place just to make sure they are not carrying any new bugs or pests that could affect the local crops and plants that live in a place. So usually that's what happens when biological material is shared between countries. So if the International Potato Center were to send us the potatoes, then they had to be in quarantine, and then they would be released, and we wouldn't make it in time for the launch to space. So we were trying to figure out how to find these Peruvian potatoes. And we learned about program from the US Department of Agriculture that is called GREEN from the USDA, and they have a collection of plants from all around the world that they share with people for agricultural or research projects. So we wrote to them, Shin and I wrote to them, and they sent us, they actually by chance had potatoes that were from the International Potato Center, that had been shared many, many years ago. So they had them in their library or collection of plants. So we had, this is an envelope that arrived, and these are the 6 different families of potatoes that they sent to us. And you can see that they even have the name there, SCIP, that's SIP, that stands for the Centro Internacional de las Papas. So we had 150 potatoes, true potato seeds. And here I'm separating them, because what we did is we separated half of the potatoes were going to go to space, and half of them were going to stay on Earth, so that when the potatoes came back from space, we could grow them together and compare and see if the time in space had affected the way they grow here. So now we have the potato seeds, and we're ready, and we know how to grow them, and we've had this conversation with the International Potato Center, who are helping us monitor our plants and take care of them. So it was time to go to space. So we could send potatoes to space because the MIT Space Exploration Initiative, the University MIT in Massachusetts, has a space exploration initiative that curated art show for space. So they made a call, and they selected 9 projects that were going to be launched into the International Space Station for 1 month. Our project was one of those art projects, and like I described before, Shin and I were thinking about potatoes and the relationship, or how the potatoes can teach us about a diversity of futures. The other 8 artists were thinking about different things and sending different objects to space. But when we had the opportunity to send the potatoes, we were very excited. But then we met our first challenge, which was this container that you see here is made of polycarbonate, a type of plastic, and it's sealed. So there can be no humidity inside the container. And also there cannot be, we have to make sure that there are no unknown pests or bugs, and that these seeds were organic, and we had to present to NASA to make sure, we had to present certification that they are nothing that we don't know is going to grow in there. And that is for the safety of everyone in the space station. But this container measures 1.4 centimeters. So if we think again on the Cheerio as our inches to centimeters converter, this is basically around the size of a Cheerio. So inside this container, no potato, no tuber could fit. And that's why we started looking for the true potato seeds. So this is the payload the container that was going to be sent to the International Space Center that included all of the art projects. And you can see those spaces with where the containers would fit. Here you can see the payload in action, because one amazing thing about this payload was that each of that, you can see there are 3 layers. Each one of the 3 layers was rotating at different speeds. The first one is not rotating, but that was because each rotation was simulating a different type of gravity. One is 0 gravity, the other one was lunar gravity, and then the third one was Martian gravity. Then the day came for our payload to be launched into space. And now you're seeing some video that I captured from NASA's website. I wasn't able to go, and even if I went, I wouldn't be able to get this kind of footage because you see it from afar. But inside this rocket are the potatoes that are being launched into space. So it was a very exciting day for us. And I should mention that this project is about space, but I'm no space expert. And that's part of the beauty and the excitement for me to work on this project. My friend Shin, she has much more experience in space, and I bring the experience that I have with plants. So together we are learning about what each other knows, and together we are contributing and exchanging what we imagine both aspects can be, both what the growing plants can mean and what going into space can mean. So this is it. Here they go. The potatoes stayed in space in lower Earth orbit for 1 month. This is the International Space Station where they stayed at. And they were there, and below you can see the Earth. And I don't think, well, they couldn't see out the window, right? Because they're in their payload, in their box, they're stowed away somewhere. But I still wonder if what they felt and what they think of their journey. So then they came back to Earth, and it was time for us to plant them. So now I'm going to share a little bit of the part where we plant these potatoes, la siembra. We imagine the growing of potatoes in many different ways. I'm sharing now the first part of our project that includes us sending these potato seeds to space and then growing them here on Earth. But in the future, we want to continue to grow potatoes with different groups of people, grow potatoes in experiments. Maybe we can keep growing potatoes without gravity in rotating sculptures. So we want the growing of the potatoes to be a key aspect of a key part of how we talk about the future, how we exchange visions of space travel, how we exchange visions of who goes to space and why, and what do they do once they are there. So for this first part of growing potatoes, we had seeds. Shin stayed with 3 families that went to space, and I stayed with the other 3. My friend Shin lives in New York, and like Mo said, I live in Portland, Oregon, so I grew these potatoes here. The first part of growing these potatoes is a little bit different than what would happen on a garden, because we have 2 potato seeds and we wanted to monitor, take a close observation of how these potatoes grew. So we grew them in these plates that are called petri dishes. Each dish was divided in 2, kind of spatially divided in 2. There wasn't a wall or anything. But on one side, the seeds that went to space were located, and on the other half of the plate, the seeds that stayed in the ground were grown. Each family of potatoes is separated from the other. So initially, these families were organized by numbers. So you can see on the left, CIP 391004, 391008, etc. Each one of those is a name or a number for these potatoes. And this is the distribution that I had for these potato seeds. All the sides that are marked with a pink are the seeds that went to space, and the sides that were marked with yellow are the seeds that stayed on Earth. So it was very important to have each petri dish divided by 2 instead of having one petri dish with the space potatoes and one petri dish with the Earth potatoes, because we wanted to make sure that as we grew them, they kind of had the same conditions, the same, it was kind of like we wanted them to be able to live in the same house or the same city, so that we could then notice the differences based on when they were growing. You can see here, this is one of the families, and if you see carefully, the seeds are just starting to sprout. So you can just start to see a little white, what is it like? Maybe like a finger like growing. It's you see them? Thank you, Mo. It's helpful to see someone. So this is the same plate 5 days afterwards. So you can see how quickly this family started to grow. Some families grew slower than others, and usually they have nothing here but a filter paper and some distilled water. So this helped us to see if the seeds were germinating and how many seeds were germinating. If we would have put them directly on the ground, we would have been not knowing what was happening for a long time. So this helped us kind of monitor all the way the process and see how the seeds were going from the beginning. But eventually, the seeds are going to need more food than just water. So then all of these seeds were transplanted into small soil containers that are called Jiffy peat pellets, that are small containers that have a soil that is specifically mixed so that they can help these plants to start to grow. After that, then the plants, when they were around 10 to 15 centimeters high, which is, again, I don't think Cheerios can help with this conversion, but more or less when they were the width of my hand, then we can transplanted them to pots. Each one of the pots that you see here is a plant. So again, we're trying to keep them separate so that we can see how they are growing, and because we want to be able to see that if any change occurs between these plants is because of the time in space, and not because they grew in a different place, because this one got more sun, this one got less water. So we are trying the best way that we can for growing things in our backyards as opposed to in a laboratory. We're trying to eliminate all the variables so that we can just keep the time in space as a variable. So I had around 120 of these pots in my backyard, and you can see they're covered with this mesh so that we can help protect them from any bugs that might find them delicious. On September 20th, the potatoes were moved inside a greenhouse at Lewis and Clark College. And this was, I'm including this picture of myself because that was the day that I had to give birth. And that was also around the time when the rains started in Portland. So before that, when it started raining, if I had just watered the potatoes, I would go out and cover them with plastic and make sure that they didn't get too much water. And then we also had the fires, so I had to run out and be taking care of the potatoes with all these conditions of what was happening with the weather here. But as soon as I gave birth, I knew that it was going to be harder for me to go run outside to the backyard and pull plastic around them and take care of them as I needed to. So Dr. Heidi Stelzer from Lewis and Clark College, from the biology department, kindly allowed me to store the potatoes inside the greenhouse that wasn't going to be used because of COVID reasons. The classes were not going to use this space. So the biology department allowed me to store the potatoes there, so then I could go and take care of them. This is a picture of them. I would go in the daytime. Sometimes I would even go in the nighttime because these became like more babies to take care of, like 120 babies to be precise, to make sure that they were doing well. They had enough water. They didn't have anyone trying to eat them. They have enough nutrients, etc., etc. So after a while, the potatoes grew and they were healthy, and it was time for the harvest. The harvest, as I don't know if you remember, but I showed you at the beginning this drawing that I made of the potato plant with the potatoes inside. This is really how it looks like. And you can see here, I took the plant out of the pot, but the soil is still in the shape of the pot. And you can see how the potatoes are growing underneath the soil and how the root structure is covering all the soil. The potatoes, some potatoes were small and some were really tiny, because for this first generation of potatoes that we were harvesting, the size was not what was the most important. The most important was to have these potatoes grow so that we can use them as seeds for a next generation of potatoes. So next summer, we can use these potatoes as seeds to grow new plants. And they're going to be the clones, so they're going to be exactly the same as the potatoes that went to space. So it was very important for us to be able to have the potatoes produce tubers, which isn't necessarily a given, especially because these potato seeds were not created, but they were bred, they were thought of, they're adapted to conditions in Peru, not in Portland, Oregon. So we didn't know if the potatoes that were growing were actually going to produce the tubers. Sometimes the potato plant can grow and have plants, but not necessarily develop the tubers underground. And I'm sharing this picture here because also I like seeing how within the same plant, the potatoes can have different colors. Here is a video of some of the potatoes that I harvested. All of these potatoes that you're seeing now, each packet is from a single plant. So all of these potatoes came from one pot, each packet. And then all of the packets together are potatoes from one same family. So you can see how many differences there are within a family and also within even the same plant. And there are, as you can imagine, a lot of potatoes that I harvested and that Shin has harvested also in New York. And now these potatoes are being stored so that we can use them as seeds for next year. The way that we're storing them is they have to have humidity, around 80% of humidity, so they can't fully dry. And they have to be in the dark in a very cold area, so that in spring or early summer, we can start growing these potatoes by exposing them to warmer temperatures and to light, so that they get activated. Seeds can be dormant, like sleeping, and then they can kind of wake up. Now, I'm including these potatoes here because I love the way that, to me, they seem to have galaxies drawn in them. If you see these patterns, I spend so much time harvesting these potatoes and just staring at the seeds and all the drawings, and I could start to hear the stories and imagine the travels that these potatoes could have if they went to space again, and even the space that they are holding in them. Which brings me to the project that I want to work with students at Dr. MLK Jr School. No, not high school, school. Junior school, which is a Space Potato Academy, una escuela de papas espaciales. So the first part of the project that Shin and I worked on, I shared with you now, and it involved sending this space to low Earth orbit. But now I want to work with you students in a project or where we imagine what would it be like to have potatoes, tubers, this time go to space. And if we are able, imaginatively, because we can't actually send them to NASA yet, I can't promise that because I can't do that. But if we can imagine these potatoes going to space, then I want us to think about, why would they be going to space? What would they need if they go to space? What would they do in space? How would they, I don't know, interact with other planets? How would they travel? What would they need for their journey? And in this journey that these potatoes will take, that we will prepare them for together, that's why it's called the Space Potato Academy. You can see here the first green arrow is Earth, and if you go all the way to the right with your eyes and you see the second green arrow, it's pointing towards Haumea, which is a dwarf planet that I would suggest that these potatoes visit for. So the first mission that these space potatoes are going on is to visit Haumea. Now, Haumea is a dwarf planet that is located in the Kuiper belt, and I might be mispronouncing that, so I'll look it up for next time, see how Kuiper is pronounced. But if we go back, you see how far it is on the right side. So before the potato seeds just went to a low Earth orbit, so they were very close to Earth. Now this is a trip that's much, much further away. And Haumea is a dwarf planet, meaning that it's very small, and it has 2 moons around it. So you can see these 2 smaller circles around this planet are actually the moons. They're called Namaka and Hayaka. And I don't know if you noticed, but this planet is strangely looking also like a potato. So Haumea is named after the fertility, a Hawaiian fertility goddess. And it's believed that the moons were formed when Haumea collapsed with something a long time ago. And then from this collision, these two moons formed. Also, something that I really love about Haumea that you can see here is that it has this red dot, not dot, this red area that we don't know why it's this red exists in the area. And the rest of the surface is covered in ice. So again, if we go to Haumea, how will the potatoes be able to land if there's ice? What meaning do they make of this red area? And also recently, Haumea the scientists discovered that Haumea also has a ring. And I say recently in 2017, which is, I think, still pretty recent. The reason why Haumea is also shaped like a potato, has an oblong shape, is because it's one of the fastest rotating planets that we know of. And it rotates so fast that the shape becomes an oval, and it rotates so fast that a day in Haumea lasts only 4 hours. So this is a project, and I wanted to share a little bit about what we've done with the project so far, and also share with you what are the things that we could be doing now that we start working together. So for the next part of this project, we will have a Space Potato Academy where we can think about these potatoes, these tubers, going into space and visiting Haumea. So we're going to prepare the potatoes, and they're also going to prepare us in return to help us think of new ways of space travel. Thank you. I am going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Lucia. This is really wonderful. There are some questions coming in the chat for you, and maybe I'll just start with a question from Mo that he was asking before you began your talk for today. Mo wanted to know, how do the seeds stay alive? And I know that you've answered that, but could you revisit that just briefly for Mo?
Yes, of course. It's a great question. So the seeds stay alive because they are kind of dormant. They're asleep. So they are not submitted to anything that would kill them. They're in a container, so they have the air that's inside that container. So they don't have the conditions as though they were floating in space on their own. So they're inside a container, which is inside a payload, which is inside the International Space Station. So that's why they can stay alive. And I said that they couldn't have any water, but they still have enough humidity in themselves so that they can they can potentially grow afterwards.
Thank you so much. Feel free to take a look at the chat. It looks like there's a question from Maya who would like to know, how did you come up with this project and what inspired it?
Good question. Well, this project came up because of my collaboration with Shin. As I mentioned before, Shin has a practice that works with space, and I have a practice that works with plants. So when we came together, we started talking about, just how we imagined, a potential collaboration. I was personally very interested in the way that space exploration represents a new area to rethink relationships between species. So that's what my whole work is about. I'm thinking about plants, and I'm thinking how we relate to plants and how we relate to other living beings. A lot of times I think plants are not seen as living beings because we can't see them move. So So I'm very interested in how we coexist and cohabit with living beings, with different living beings. So when we think about space and we think of people going there and exploring space for exploitation of minerals, to find, other things to sustain our life here on Earth, I was very curious about how those relationships that we have here on Earth and that exploration that has been historically colonial, and all of that, what that implies in terms of exploitation of others, how space can become an opportunity to rethink those relationships, and how potatoes can, with potatoes ways and plant ways, inspire different approaches to exploring new territories, to exploring and meeting new places and perhaps even living beings.
That is such a perfect answer. It really fills out how we think about your work. There's a question that came in through the YouTube channel from the Portland Farmers Market, and they're curious if you're familiar with moon trees, and also where are the seed potatoes being stored over winter with such specific humidity, dark, and cold requirements?
Yes, thank you for that question. I do know about the moon trees. Love the moon trees. I'll tell a little bit about them if in case other people don't know. But the moon trees are a project where some trees were sent to orbit around the moon, the seeds as well, to orbit around the moon, and then when they came back to Earth, they were planted and grown, and in some cases they became kind of like diplomatic gifts. So they were given to some nations as a gift for diplomacy, saying like, here, you can have a moon tree. And I don't think all of them lived. Some of them did, and they still are growing, and they're big trees, and they have these plaques or signs that say, I'm a moon tree and tell the story. So this is a kind of general way of telling the story. But yes, I know about them, and they're an inspiration as well. I love the ideas. When I heard the story, I was imagining the trees themselves going through space, and like thinking about, just the image of them is beautiful and inspiring to me. So definitely. And then for the conditions over winter, I want to thank Elisa Salas, who is a potato breeder from the International Potato Center, who has helped us along the way, really teaching us so many things about how to grow the potatoes and how they carry out their experiments in the Potato Center. Because there's a part of this project that is an experiment and is looking at how different ways of how these experiments would be done in science. But then also we're kind of negotiating those conditions that would happen in a lab, and then adapting them to what we have, what's available to us. So this is a good question, because I knew how the potatoes would be grown in a lab or in this, in a lab, but then I had to adapt them and grow them in my backyard or in this greenhouse. The greenhouse at Lewis and Clark was fantastic because it prevented the overwatering through the rains. But the temperatures I could never control in the growth, not even in a greenhouse, because the temperatures technically had to be lower than what was actually the temperatures that we had here in summer. So the same thing with the storing. I will answer the question now. The same thing with storing the potatoes. We kind of have this protocol that should be done, and then we have what we are actually doing, and it's the humidity is perfect because Portland is pretty humid right now, as you know, and then the dark and cold requirements are they're in a box inside basement, and temperature requirements, I have a little thermometer that I am keeping track. And so far, the temperatures are okay in the place that I'm storing them, in the backyard, no, it's not a basement, it's garage. In the garage. So far the temperatures are okay, but if they start getting hotter, I have a special kind of fridge that I've adapted to have the temperature. Very long answer, I'm sorry. I hope. Okay.
Very specific. I think, Lucia, I think that Mo has a question. I'm gonna, Mo, can you ask your question for us?
How do they get down safely without since there's orbit and stuff? The ship is made of metal strong, but also how do they get back down, because they're in plastic and plastic is easy to burn down and turn into mold, and then the seeds would burn.
Super good question, Mo. Thank you. But that's a good question, and you're right. However, the potatoes are inside the plastic containers, the polycarbonate containers, and they are inside a payload and they're inside a capsule. So they are not traveling themselves on space. So they are coming inside a capsule. So they have their own ship that protects them, which is something important to think about for the future Space Potato Academy. How do we create some vessels or whatever we want to send them in, like rockets or capsules, that protect them from, the temperatures of coming down or going up at that speed.
Okay, that makes a little more sense, even though, but I still have trouble understanding the science behind that. I'm going to start Googling some stuff later today. I'm going to start Googling some stuff.
Super, Mo. I love hearing that. Yes, we can talk more and we can learn together. Honestly, there's a lot of things that I'm sure you'll find out that you can teach me, and I'll keep also learning, so we can exchange what we learn together.
Thank you so much, Lucia and Mo. That was a really, really great question. We have another question from Kimberly. Kimberly, would you like to ask Lucia, or would you like me to do it for you?
Either or. I could ask the question. How do you see this project progressing or branching out in the future? So like 3 or 5 years from now, because I know you're very focused on this topic.
That's a good question, Kimberly. Thank you. Because actually, I think it speaks to something that's important for me in the artistic practice at this time, is how to think of projects that are long-term and allow the projects to evolve, mature, and kind of incorporate learnings as they happen, as they do. So it doesn't assume that the project knows everything from beforehand and then is developed, but the making and the exchange with people feed the project and allow it to change over time, or even grow, if we think of it as a plant. So in 3 to 5 years from now, it's hard to say. There are some things that we would like to do, and then there are some things that I'd like to incorporate with that I probably don't know yet. Some of those things that we imagine so far is we want to build a rotating sculpture where we can grow potatoes here on Earth without gravity. We want to engage in different aspects of the project. We think of them as missions. So have different missions with the potatoes that we can work with different groups of people. And that's how one of those missions is the one that we're going to start with students. So there's a communication with other people so that we can talk about different visions of space and travel. There's growing the potatoes in different kinds of iterations, some more connected to controlled conditions, like what would happen in science, and some around conditions that are less controlled and more about like seeing what can happen in place, especially seeing what can happen when different species are going together. And then, yes, so many iterations on missions. We are also interested in the role of potato as food throughout time on Earth, but then also the role of the potential role of potato as food on space. And some movies have talked a little bit about it, but how do we, how do we rethink it with maybe different characters? And how do we think of potatoes as food not only for humans, but then, yes, just also teachers for humans, etc., etc.
Looks like Mo had to go for a minute, but we do have one last question from Tenzin, who's curious about how you see this project tying into your artistic practice overall, and maybe specifically in relationship to the Planton Mobile.
Yes, thank you, Tenzin. This, as I mentioned a little bit before, I think this project connects to my artistic practice because I've been thinking about a relationship to plants for a long time. And so this is a way for me to think about plants in space, which has two different components, I think. One of them is the idea of movement that I've been very interested in plants. So I've been thinking about how plants move and we can't see them move. Then I've been thinking about plant migration around the earth, how they move from one place to another, driven by people or driven by climate change. Then, so it's interesting and fun also for me to think about plants now moving to different planets or outside of this planet. And then on the other hand, in my practice, I'm thinking how plants can teach me to interact with other living beings in different ways, and how can I study plants and learn about plants with plants. So I'm interested in art and science collaborations, but I'm also interested in how, when I create these experiments or when I start these projects, I'm not thinking about plants as objects that I'm going to study, but more subjects that I'm going to meet. So this project is also connected to this idea, and we have these scientific components, but that we're trying to adapt from an artistic perspective. And one thing that I wanted to mention in my talk that I didn't mention is the seeds arrived to us with numbers, and I pointed that out. But then I forgot to mention that throughout the process, there are some parts of the experiment that don't make sense with our project. It doesn't make sense for us to call these potatoes 3911008. That's kind of I think doesn't recognize their subjectivity, their livingness, their personhood. So we changed the names and we gave them different names, which can still maybe be problematic if we're naming these other plants after people. But it was better to have, I thought, people's names, and all of these people's names in the families that I took care of were members of my own family. So trying to find these little gestures where the scientific experiment is adapted to think of these relationships in a different way.
Lucia, thank you so much. We have some other really compelling questions in the chat, but we're out of time for today. So we'll have time maybe on your third visit. We wanted to thank you so much for being with us and sharing more about your work. And Mo, thank you so much for coming and doing the intros with us and for your great questions. To all
I left the meeting for a bit so I could actually see if I could log into my computer again.
Really nice to have you with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we want to thank all the students at the Dr. MLK Jr School who are watching on our YouTube live channel. And we will look forward to seeing Lucia one more time in spring term to hear how her project has gone with the students or whatever else she'd like to share with us then. Next week, you can join us here, same time, same place, 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time on our YouTube channel to hear more from Intisar Abioto, who is, of course, another one of our 2021 remote artists in residence here at KSMoCA. Again, thank you to Lucia, to Harrell, Amanda, all the PSD